Pete, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, thank you for being with us here at KWMR Radio, and I have your old friend Guy Meyer, who is ready to reminisce with you. Good morning, Guy.
Good morning, Sue.
And here's your old friend Pete Seeger on the line, and you have at it. I know you want to talk to him about some shared experiences that you guys had, and I hear, Pete, that you have a little bit of a sore throat, so save your voice and let Guy get you into this.
Guy, I don't know if I could recognize you or you could recognize me. That was like 50 years ago.
Was it that far?
Almost.
It doesn't seem very long ago. Well, what I'd like to do, Pete, would be to first start off with how we first met. Do you remember that?
No, I do not.
Okay. There was somebody called Armand Asante, a young...
Sanyal?
Huh?
Amar Sanyal?
Yeah. His sister was a folk singer, and because she was, I had a church there in Newburgh, New York, right nearby, and so I asked her, I heard that Pete Seeger lives right across the river or wherever it was, and how about introducing me? And she was very insistent on maintaining your privacy. So I tried to persuade her, but no, she wouldn't have any part of it. So I gave up. And then one day I was out on a call, and I came back to my house, and there you were in my living room.
Yes, I remember it was down around Grand Street or Liberty Street.
Yeah, but you were in my living room, and you hadn't come there. I just realized you hadn't come there to see me. I don't think you knew that I existed. But anyway, you came because there was a group of young blacks. I don't know whether you will remember them. One was Charles. He was a classmate and friend of my daughter, Lynn's.
Is he the one who now publishes the little newspaper?
No.
Was his last name Stewart?
Oh, Stewart Bryant?
No, Charles
Stewart
runs a little newspaper there.
Oh,
it's the Hudson Valley Press.
Oh, that people. I don't know. Anyway, it was... you can imagine what I felt when I saw you sitting in my living room. I said, what, And then, so we had a few experiences after that. And so what do you remember now around about that time?
Well, I had only just started to live in the Hudson Valley in 1949.
Yeah.
But I was getting acquainted and finding out what a rich history this region had. I didn't know that Newburgh was where George Washington turned down the chance to become King of America.
I never heard that.
Oh, it's a great story. It was after Cornwallis had been beaten at Yorktown and sailed back to England, and King George just about gave up. But the peace treaty had not been signed. And Washington figured that until the peace treaty is signed, I can't let the army go back home. So they were camped out south of Newburgh, and George wrote a letter to Martha and said, it's a beautiful place I'm living in, an old Dutch farmhouse on the edge of the river, and I got a beautiful view downriver to the mountains. Won't you come up and stay with me here? So Martha came up and stayed with him almost a year, or maybe more than a year, in Newburgh. It was back in 1783. And the officers were very upset that they weren't getting paid. The Continental Congress was printing money that was not worth anything, That's why you still have a saying, it's not worth a continental.
Oh, that's where it came from.
And the officers circulate a letter, "Dear General, won't you please take over the reins of government and bring some order to this country? We will follow wherever you lead." Well, Washington read the letter, and he called the officers together, and in very serious tone of voice, he says, "I'm surprised you do not know my Republican convictions. I did not spend 6 years fighting royalty just to set up a new royalty. I do not want to hear of such a suggestion again." And he dismissed them. And this was one reason the whole country loved him, because they knew that he could have taken over the government, but he refused to, and said he wanted to have a democracy.
Uh-huh.
I still sing a song which was taught me when they marched down through New Jersey to take over Washington when the peace treaty was finally signed. They sang, "Doodle, doodle, doodle, dandy, cornstalk rum and a homemade brandy, Indian pudding and a pumpkin pie. That'll make those Yankees fly." Boom, 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 went the drums.
Oh.
That's pretty good. Now I'd like to hear a little bit about this. You had this bright idea of having a boat sailing up and down the Hudson. I remember you referred to it as Old Muddy.
Big Muddy.
Big Muddy, yeah. And where did you get this idea of having a boat?
A man from an old Dutch family, Bill Verplank, his family had come to live in Beacon. Well, they didn't call it Beacon then. They call it Fishkill Landing.
Ah.
And he liked to sail, and he had a friend who had been the captain of a big sailboat, but the sailboats were being driven out of business, and steam had taken over.
Mm-hmm.
But at one time, they had like 400 of these big sailboats. They were called sloops because they had one tall mast, like 100 feet.
Mm-hmm.
And Bill wrote a book with his friend Moses Collier. Oh, that's the Collier family. They had two crazy brothers in New York, the Collier brothers.
Oh, yeah.
But anyway, Moses Collier was middle-aged, but he was out of a job. And the two of them wrote a book called Sloops of the Hudson. And they said these were the most beautiful boats we ever knew, and they will never be seen again. It was usually a family business. They built a boat somewhere on the banks of the Hudson, and they slid it into the water, and the captain and three strong men would raise the sails, and they also had a cabin boy and a cook. So a total of about 6 people on the boat sailed Hudson River bricks to build New York City, and Catskill bluestone slate for the sidewalks of New York, and I guess Catskill lumber, too. In the early days, they carried passengers. Alexander Hamilton wrote one of the Federalist papers on board a Hudson River sloop bound for Poughkeepsie. Well, anyway, I write a letter to a friend of mine, said, they built a replica of the Mayflower, and they built a replica of the yacht America. Why don't we get some people together and build a replica of a Hudson River sloop?
So,
well, it was a crazy idea,
yeah.
But my friend took me up on it,
Yeah.
and we raised $10 here and $10 there until we had $140,000.
Whoa.
Finally, some millionaires came in help. The Rockefellers gave about $10,000 or $20,000, and Mrs. Wallace of the Reader's Digest gave $10,000 or $20,000. But most of the money was raised in $5 bills and $10 bills, and finally, we named the boat Clearwater.
Ah, yes.
And this beautiful boat, it is a beautiful boat, takes 50 children out every day, sometimes twice a day, 50 children at a time, and teaches them what makes a Hudson dirty and what's got to be done to clean it up. And 3 hours later, they go back to school, having learned a little science and a little history and sung a few songs, told a few jokes, and some of them get their lives changed, as you know. And what we did was to start off a cleanup campaign. We sailed it down to Washington, and I remember having a pie chart, a disc of cardboard in my hand. I said, here's the piece of pie that goes to that purpose, and here's the piece of pie that goes to the military. That was a great big piece of pie. And here's what goes for cleaning up the environment, a tiny little sliver, like 1% or less. And then I remember slinging the cardboard off over all the congressmen in the audience like a frisbee. And by gosh, a year later, they passed the Water Pollution Amendments of 1972. Wow. And since then, $5 or $10 billion have been spent to help towns build sewage treatment plants. So we had songs about it, about how down the river 1 million toilet chains, by my Hudson, so convenient place to drain.
Very good. Can you remember now more about this sloop that you had built? That was fantastic. It seemed to me to be so big, so solid. So tell us about it. And they had a crew and stuff.
Yeah. This is what Pete was just talking about, and it had a crew, and now it takes children on the river.
Yeah, but
we have 6 very well trained crew people, but we also have 6 or more volunteers, and the volunteers often are the most important members. They're all ages, and they're black and white, and women and men. And they are young and old, and they will teach the students on what's going on the river. My 12-year-old granddaughter, for example, was in charge of the little class on microscopes, and the kids that look through the microscope and says, "Hey, what's all those wiggly things in the water?" And my granddaughter would say, that's called plankton. That plankton is for fish what grass is for cows.
Well, that's a great way of stating it.
Yeah.
So tell me more about this boat, the Clearwater. That was...
Well, we named the boat the Clearwater. I admit there was a big argument. Some wanted the whole project to be purely historical, just like the Mayflower. And they wanted to dress the crew in costumes of old days, but the younger members paid their $10 to become a member of the organization, and they voted to call the boat Clearwater. Although I remember it was a bad joke. A policeman down in New York City, when we first sailed the boat down from Maine, it was built up in Maine, we sailed it to Maine, he said, "What's the name of that beautiful boat?" And I said, "Clearwater." He said, "Clearwater? Have you seen the water you're sailing in?" You looked down, it was full of junk. But little by little by little, and this is really my political philosophy these days, Guy.
Yeah.
I believe that if there is a human race still here in 100 years, it's going to be millions of little things which do it. They may be religious groups, they may be scientific groups, they may be theater groups or choruses. In Philadelphia, there's a neighborhood that's been rebuilt by a Chinese-American woman who shows children how they can paint murals on the sides of buildings. Beautiful murals. Not 5 or 10 of them, but dozens, maybe 50 or 100. And the whole neighborhood, which was a bombed-out neighborhood, is coming back. And it's all these little things which are going to save the world.
Wow. Pete, before we forget it, or before I forget it, let's go to this famous corn feed. Do you remember that?
Yes.
You got the idea that everybody was in this it was a Sloop festival, right?
Yeah.
And everybody was making some money on something or other. And you said, well, they're all making money on it. Why don't we give something away for free? Do you remember saying that?
Yeah.
And then, so you went to and got a hold of this big, this big cauldron.
Yes.
Do you remember that?
We still have it.
You still have it. And how we had some concrete blocks and some fuel and built a fire.
Well, along the edges of any river, there's always driftwood.
Yeah.
And when it's dried out, it makes good firewood. So we took driftwood and we made a nice fire under this great big iron pot, about 3 feet in diameter.
Filled it with a hose.
And we put corn in wire baskets. You don't need to cook corn very long.
No.
You just put it in. I used to cook it 3 or 4 minutes, but now we found it's even tastier if you only cook it for 1 1/2 minutes.
Wow. Thanks for the
tip. The water has to be a big, big pot, so it stays boiling.
Yeah.
If you just have a little pot, why, it would cool down when you put a lot of corn in it.
Uh-huh.
But we have this big pot boiling fast, and about 8 or 10 ears of corn go in at a time, and 1.5 minutes later, they're so sweet and tender, you would hardly believe it.
As are you. And Guy, I want to thank you so much for bringing Pete Seeger to the station and talking about all these wonderful memories that you have, and getting a corn recipe to boot.
Okay.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but we're on a schedule. We're in the middle of a pledge drive. Pete, can you hang on while we do a little pledging for the station?
Oh, I'll be glad to. I'll hang on.
Excellent, and then we'll talk some more.
Okay.
And I just want to pay homage to Guy Meyer here, who had a wonderful show on KWMR for years.
Wonderful.
Called The Power of Love. And he, as well as you, personify this power of love. And as you said, just a million little things is what's going to change the world. And you guys have done more than little things. Guy, thank you so much for arranging for this interview and for coming into the station.
Thanks for your role in this, Sue.
Oh, hang on.
Yes?
I'll be back.
Okay, we'll wait for you.